Ever since the beginning of handheld gaming, there's always been this drive or this initiative to make things as small as possible so you can fit in your pocket and take it on the go. Anbernic decided to take this a step further with RG Nano and make this thing ridiculously small. I didn't expect it to be this small when I first bought it, but when it got here, I was taken aback. Not only that, but this thing actually works. Now, don't get me wrong, I want to be upfront and let you know that this, above all else, is a novelty item. This is not something that I would recommend as your main go-to for gaming while you're on the go or even in a handheld form, but I gotta give it to Anbernic. They've done a really good job in terms of making this as some form of an experience that you can take with you. Of course, you're gonna get hundreds of games, if not thousands, on the SD card when you get this, but yeah, technically you're going to have everything all the way up to PlayStation 1, but I wouldn't recommend playing PlayStation 1 titles on here. In fact, I wouldn't recommend playing all of the titles that are on here. Even some 16-bit titles have issues running on this thing. But before we get into that, let's talk about the specs. Let's talk about what is included in this little tiny handheld. Anbernic decided to go with an ARM Cortex A7 processor clocked at 1.2 gigahertz. There is 64 megabytes of DDR2 RAM. You could either go with a 64 gigabyte or 128 gigabyte micro SD card. Either way, it's going to be chock full of games. The screen itself is 1.5 inches and is 240 by 240, so you're looking at a 1-to-1 ratio, and there are issues with that. I'll go about that later on in the video, but it is an IPS LCD display that has a 60 hertz refresh rate. The battery is 1050 milliamp hours, so you're looking at roughly 2 to 2.5 hours of battery life on average. There is an aluminum body, which feels honestly very premium. It weighs roughly around 75 grams, and the OS is funky. Now, I obviously went with the red version. They call this magenta, and to me, it obviously looks more red than anything else. You can also get a blue version or a purple version. Now, these, if you're interested, you can order them directly from Anbernic's website, but it's $65.99 plus $12 shipping if you live in the United States. If you go to Keep Retro, though, which I'll have a link in the description below, you can get it for $72.99 and it's free shipping. Another option is to go straight to Amazon if you feel more comfortable buying it over there. And based off of sellers that I've seen online, you're going to be paying anywhere around $85-ish, $86 on average with Prime shipping. If you feel more comfortable going with that, then I totally understand, because with Prime shipping, you're going to have a hassle-less return process if you don't like this. In the box itself, you're going to get an instruction manual, the RG Nano, a keychain to attach to RG Nano, a USB-A to USB-C cable, and a USB-C to 3.5 millimeter adapter. Here's the thing when it comes to these little handhelds. I love the form factor. I love being able to have something like this on the go, but for a person like me that has rather large hands, it is somewhat uncomfortable to play on something this small. I would always recommend the Miu Mini Plus or even the RG35XX in comparison to this for something that's a little bit more mobile and a little bit more comfortable. The D-pad itself is very reminiscent of the RG35XX, so if you're used to that, if you're used to D-pads from Anbernic, this is right up your alley. The only thing that I don't like is that there is this opportunity of having false inputs. So if you accidentally go one way or the other, it's just going to go ahead and register that, and you're going to end up moving. And because it is so small, it is rather difficult to have precise movements. The D-pad moves a little bit more than I would like in the cutout for it, but I understand why it's like that, especially with its size. If you take that out of account and you give this to like a child, you'll be fine. You don't really have to worry too much about it. The face buttons, they feel great, and because of the size, you're going to be using the point of your thumb in order to actually play. And you know, again, depending on who this is for, it could be fine or it could not. The L and R buttons, they're very clicky and they are very reminiscent of Nintendo Switch Joy-Con stroller buttons. So if you're used to that and you like that, then you're 100% good to go. I do miss the fact that there is no L2 or R2 or anything like that to kind of like have that. And again, because of the size, I don't know where exactly they would do that and make it feel ergonomic and just feel natural in terms of playing. That being said, there is a grill here in the front that's supposed to be kind of reminiscent of the original Game Boy, which is nice, but the actual speaker is right here. There's a mono speaker that's on the bottom. It's actually relatively loud. On the side, you're going to find your SD card slot, which is nice, and then there is the power button that's right here, which is a multi-use button. We'll get into that later on. And then on the top, you're going to find a USB-C port, which is where you pretty much do everything in terms of data transfers or just charging in general. And over here, if you want to go ahead and put on that keychain that came with it, you can go ahead and do that as well. One thing that I do have to mention is that this does not have a sleep function of any kind. So if you want to go ahead and turn it off or stop playing for whatever reason, I would recommend that you create a save state. There is also an autosave feature that is here that is pretty cool. But if you push the power button, it'll go ahead and it'll kind of flash the Anbernic logo and it'll start a boot up sequence. And from there, it'll take you to its clock function, which is nice if you want to just have it as like a keepsake on a desk or whatever it may be to kind of give you the time. But after that, if you just want to, play games, you push the start button and it'll take you to its default menu, which is the G menu 2X. Now, this is the first handheld that I've ever had that has this sort of interface, but apparently back in the day when handheld emulation was first starting out, this was the go-to. This was how you played games, and it's nice. It does the job, so to speak, albeit it does look somewhat archaic, but it is what it is. When it comes down to it though, this is the only way that you can access the media player functionality in this handheld. So if you want to listen to music, podcasts, or whatever it may be, and you want to treat this as, local stored media, that's the only way that you can access it. But if you wanted to just play video games, if you just wanted it to be, your portable gaming machine, if you push the power button very quickly, it'll boot up this menu. And from here, you have your volume, you have your brightness, you have your set launcher retro FE, and then your power down, right? So if you hit set launcher retro FE and it's asked if you're sure and you're like, yep, let's go, it'll go ahead and start a soft reboot, right? So you have the clock functionality that's there. If you hit start one more time, it'll take you to that launcher. And this is honestly, in my opinion, the best way to access all of your games while you're gaming on this thing. I like it because it's nice, it's intuitive, and you can change the theme if you want to. So if you hit the power button one more time, you'll have your volume, you have your brightness, and then you have your theme. So this is the Anbernic theme that you just saw. If you wanted to switch to classic, it'll go ahead and switch over. And once it switches over, it'll, reboot the clock, and then it'll reboot the theme right then and there. It's kind of nifty. I like it. Personally, I like this theme the most out of all of them. But once you hit the power button one more time, you do have the set launcher to G menu 2X, and that'll take you back to where you were before. So I like the way that this runs. It definitely adds a lot of versatility, and this is something that I've never experienced before. So I know that there are some people that have experienced funky OS before in the past, but this is awesome. I like the way that it's light, it feels comfortable, and it's not anything that's super crazy. It's very easy to navigate your way in and out of things. Growing up, my household was a Nintendo household. So we had the original Nintendo, we had the Super Nintendo, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Advance, so on and so forth. So when I look at handhelds like this, I want to experience some of the titles that I had in my childhood on something like this on the go. And that's where that one-to-one screen really comes into play, because that screen, although it is nice to have a one-to-one ratio, not everything perfectly translates to it. For example, the original Game Boy is a 10:9 ratio. So when it came down to it, it didn't work properly. Now, there is the aspect ratio option within the menu, and from there you can adjust it to either scaled, cropped, or you can stretch it out. And yeah, it's there, it's nice, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work properly. In some instances, like the Game Boy Advance, you can also zoom in, which is kind of this weird, I don't know, hybrid between having it stretched, but also zoomed in, or scaled and zoomed in at the same time. With the Super Nintendo, you could only have it as either stretched or cropped. You couldn't actually properly scale a Super Nintendo feed or emulation on this screen, which is so weird. I don't understand why that's even a thing, but it is. There are some PlayStation 1 games that I just would not recommend anyone ever playing on here. I mean, we're talking about Resident Evil 3, we're talking about any sort of 3D rendering that's there. So Tekken 3 is also something else that I wouldn't recommend, but if you have 2D side-scrolling games, you might be able to get away with it. It's not super bad. If you're playing Super Nintendo games, I would avoid playing anything that has an FX chip. So we're talking about Yoshi's Island or Star Fox, for instance, Doom. Those are games that they require so much horsepower that it isn't something that plays well with most emulators, let alone something that is like this. I do want to also add that in my testing of all of the emulators and all of the games that are here, this thing gets pretty warm very quickly. And we're not talking about just on PlayStation 1, which I would personally expect. We're talking about also on 8-bit and 16-bit games. This thing got relatively warm, not to the point to where, I had to put it down, but I could just tell that it was warm because of all that was processing. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be worked on or changed, but it definitely kept things a little warm while I was playing. So who is this for? Well, first and foremost, if you're a collector or if you just want to have some sort of novelty items, then I would probably recommend this to you, because this is just something that's cool to have and just kind of like show off from time to time. But also, this is something that I think that children could go ahead and actually have and game on. The only thing that I'd be concerned about is how easily the aluminum casing will get scratched up as they're playing around, or they accidentally slip it. The fact that there is even a keychain that's included with this just means that this is meant to be something that, or at least Anbernic thinks that this is something that is meant to be attached on something that you would take with you on the go. I don't know. I could see the screen eventually getting scratched up. You can tell that there's a lot of layers that are here, but overall, this isn't something that I would recommend to just take out and about with you. But yeah, for children or just to have a novelty item with you. That being said, whenever I look at this handheld, I just can't help but think that I would have a better gaming experience, or a better overall experience, on the Miyoo Mini Plus or the RG35XX. I look at this and I just think that it's just too small to have long extended periods of time of gaming on this. Over time, my hands would just cramp up because of the form factor and the ergonomics. This is just something that I would just have as a novelty item more than anything else. So what do you guys think of the RG Nano from Anbernic? Is this something that you would pick up for yourself, or is this just something that is kind of like a novelty? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything, and I've talked enough about the Miyoo Mini Plus as well as the Anbernic RG35XX in this video. If you want to see my thoughts on those, then click on this video over here, and then click on this one here as well. Until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.